So in thinking about the referendum, I thought it might be helpful to start off with having a few key dates in our minds from Scottish political history. Either if you're new to it or if you haven't looked at it for a long time, that just gives some kind of context to where we are with the referendum and how Scotland has got here. So I suppose a date that we could start looking at Scottish political history from is 1603, which was the union of the crowns, when the Scottish crown and the English crown were united. I suppose we could say the next key date is 1707, when we have the union of the parliaments. So the Scottish Parliament ceases to exist, and instead Scotland sends MPs to the UK Parliament in London. What is significant, I think, though, and we have to note about this date, is that although the Scottish Parliament ceases to exist, Scottish identity doesn't cease to exist. There is no attempt to trample on Scottish identity, and importantly, key carriers of Scottish identity still continue to exist. So Scotland has a separate church, its own separate legal system, and its own separate education system. And throughout the years that follow, these become quite important carriers of a distinct sense of Scottish identity and a distinct sense that Scotland does things slightly differently. Moving on from that through the 19th century, we could say that another key date on the road to the referendum is the creation of the Scottish Office in 1885. So the Scottish Office marks the first institutional expression at a UK government level of the fact that there is a distinct Scottish dimension to public policy, and that this needs to be represented in its own institutional fashion. Over the course of the 19th century and into the 20th century, the powers of the Scottish Office are gradually strengthened and eventually form the basis of the powers that the Scottish Parliament will inherit in 1999. Moving on from there, in our extremely brief history of Scottish politics, one of the next significant dates could be 1979. So in 1979, there is the first referendum on devolution for Scotland. The Labour government of the time proposed the creation of a Scottish Assembly. There was duly a referendum, and in fact a majority of Scots voted yes in that referendum, but a threshold was put into the legislation, which meant that not only did a majority of those who voted have to vote yes, but a majority of the Scottish population had to vote yes. So although there was a yes vote, it wasn't a significant enough yes vote to cause the creation of a Scottish Assembly in 1979. Moving on from 1979, we might say that closer to the present, another key date that leads us towards the referendum is 1997. So in 1997, the Conservative Party loses the general election, and loses the general election particularly badly in Scotland by losing all of its seats. And a Labour government is elected, and in its manifesto it said that it would hold a referendum on the creation of the Scottish Parliament. That referendum was duly held, and a majority of Scots voted in favour of the creation of a Scottish Parliament, which was eventually created in 1999. Moving forward from there, after we have the two first terms of the Scottish Parliament were controlled by a Labour and Liberal Democrat coalition government, we then move on to 2007, where for the first time we have an SNP government. So we have a Scottish National Party minority government in the Scottish Parliament, which rules for the next 4 years. Moving on from there, we could say that 2011 is a significant date because this marks the point where the SNP minority government achieves a majority in the 2011 Scottish Parliament elections and promises in its manifesto to hold a referendum. We move from there to the point we're at the moment, when in September 2014, the people of Scotland can vote on whether Scotland should be an independent country in the referendum promised by the SNP government.